Welcome to the Drama Coach podcast. I'm Lisa, actor and coach, and I help young performers and the people that are supporting them build confidence, skill, and a real understanding of the industry. Welcome to episode 2. In this episode, I talk about what I see going wrong in self-tapes. I also talk about how you can make those things right. So I am really excited to talk about this on the podcast because I see a lot of self-tapes every week and I create a lot myself and for my child performers. So I feel I have a lot to say about this, and hopefully there will be some key takeaways that you can take to help yourself or your child have stronger self-tapes. So the first thing I want to address is that acting students can try too hard, especially with an emotional scene, and they will play the emotion rather than the intention. It is fantastic if you or your child can bring tears, bring anger, etc. That's amazing, and that is a skill in itself. But what you don't want is to just be aiming for that emotion, because when you play an emotion, it feels forced. Casting directors, people viewing your tapes will feel that. It won't feel as real as if you play the intention. So you work out what the character wants and you play that. And if tears come and anger comes, etc., fantastic. But don't lead with the emotion. And the second thing I often see is overthinking. Overthinking how it should look. Students thinking about their bodies and their faces too much. Perhaps they've done a little bit too much practice in the mirror. I think, some mirror practice and watching back can be good, but sometimes it can then make you overthink and not try to pull an ugly face or something like that. So we want to just relax. I'll talk about relaxation a little bit later on in more detail, but it's so easy to say, don't overthink. And I appreciate, I can be an overthinker myself, that it is hard not to overthink. But if you're guiding someone through a self-tape and you've done all the preparation that I'll talk about in a moment, then just do some sort of shake it off exercise and let it go and be in the moment and be present. And hopefully some more things that I go on to explain will make this seem more clear. So another thing is lack of understanding in the scene. And this can be really tricky with very young children, or the brief that you've been given, you haven't got any more detail. Maybe it's even a dummy scene. So it can be hard to have a full understanding of the scene. But take everything that you do know, imagine the rest, fill in the blanks. We can all do that as actors, right? The children that I teach have fantastic imaginations, as long as it fits within the realm of the character's world. Decide who you're talking to, what your character wants, and what's just happened. Where have they come from? What have they been doing prior to this? It doesn't matter if that scene doesn't exist. You need to work out where you've come from, so that impacts the way in which you respond and you act. Again, it doesn't need overthinking. Plan it, know it, and then let it go, so it becomes a natural part of the character. The other thing that can be tricky, in my opinion, is energy levels. I see tapes that are really overexcited sometimes and too big or too theatrical. Especially, I love having a theatrical background, and I think the training ground of theatre is fantastic. But if it's not a theatre audition or a musical theatre audition, if it is an audition for film, and that's tricky, right? Because now so many auditions have been turned over to self-tapes, sometimes it might be a theatrical audition. But if it's not, if it's a screen audition, you want to rein that energy in a little bit and not be too big and too over the top. But similarly, you don't want to have a lack of energy. I find, especially if people don't know their lines as well as they should or could, that the energy slows down because they need that thinking time. And if it's a pacey scene, if the scene should be pacey and exciting, and it feels too slow, then that's jarring for your casting director. So getting the energy right is difficult. So again, go back to that understanding of the scene and what sort of energy the scene and the style of audition demands, and try to get that balance right. Another very important facet to acting is, of course, reacting. More often than not, in a self-tape, there is another character or several other characters that perhaps you as the parent are reading in the lines for. Fantastic. Don't overthink that. I tend to put on different voices occasionally if they're extremely different characters, but generally you want to keep those lines quite neutral. You're not acting as the reader, you're not the actor. You just need those lines nice and fluid for the actor or your child to respond to. And in that responding, it doesn't have to be a verbal response straight away. We want to see it in their facial expression, in their body perhaps. Think about what they've just heard. As you observe real life, nobody thinks instantly. You've got to have the thought, so let the child have the thought and then respond. Perhaps there's even some, I used to call it stage business, but obviously it's not stage business anymore, now it's screen business. Have some business happening before their first line as well. A little bit of whatever their character might be doing. I think we had one where my daughter was stoking a fire. But again, don't just get them to stoke the fire, get them to think about how they feel about this fire. Have they been forced to stoke this fire? Are they excited to do so? Are they freezing, etc.? There is so much you can go into here, and I don't want to overwhelm anyone, especially if it's their first self-tape, but have a think about how you react to the lines and how you react or act before the scene even starts and when the scene is finished. If you're already acting or your child is already acting in the industry, you'll know that directors often run on. They don't call cut straight away. They want to see what magic might happen beyond the lines. So it's a really good idea to get your actor, your young actor, practicing that right from self-tapes. You can always cut a little bit out if it goes on too long. So let it run a little bit before you call cut and stop the tape. So I sort of talked about two things in one there. That's the idea of listening and reacting, as well as having a little bit of reacting either side of the scene itself. Obviously, there's a level of technicality that comes to a self-tape. And if you're just starting out, you will need a blank wall or a sheet hung up. Personally, I really don't like them when they're all creased. Hopefully your casting director's not going to mind that, because it's pretty hard to get a crease-free hung sheet. We have a self-tape wall now, just in our kitchen. It's painted slate grey, which seems to suit everyone, which is wonderful. But if you're not at the stage that you want to be painting walls or hanging backdrops, just find a neutral or plain wall. I've seen some recorded against doors, but that might not necessarily be big enough, because of course, more often than not, although there are the exceptions to the rules, you want your phone, most people are using their phone to record, in landscape, not portrait. So you've got that long view for your casting directors. Very occasionally, if you are filming perhaps for a vertical, although many vertical auditions still want your tape in landscape, very occasionally you will be asked for portrait, but it's unusual. The standard is still at the moment to have your phone in landscape, so make sure you're doing that. So you want a plain backdrop, nothing distracting behind you, certainly not adding any false backdrops like a screen, because that's going to blur out, if you've got a green screen thing going on, that's going to blur out the edges of gestures and things. So don't do that. Just have the background as decluttered as possible. Then you want good lighting. Natural lighting is absolutely fine. If you can do it in the daylight, perfect. Just use your natural lighting. Try to check there's no weird shadows. And if you don't and you want to invest, then get some softbox lights and set those up. 3-point lighting is the absolute perfection. I always really manage 2-point lighting, to be honest, for mine, and it seems to do a good job. And you want to angle, you want them to be soft because you don't want any strange shadows. And you can play around and angle them and get the lighting just right for you. sound. Where I record is a little bit echoey because, again, it's that nice grey wall in the kitchen. So I always make sure that I have a microphone. I have a little plug-in microphone, wireless. It plugs into my phone and then clips onto my top. So it's very simple. I don't bother giving my reader a microphone. They can just be the other side of the camera, and that really is all you need, and it does a really good job. So check your mic, check your lights, check your background, and it really is those three things. Apart from the framing, be careful here. Check you've read the brief. There will be requests like a full body shot or whatever. But in general, you want that mid shot. You want sort of head, shoulders, because we want to catch any gestures that are happening. Usually sort of a head and shoulders. Make sure the eyes can be seen. Get fringes out of faces. Don't have a strange angle. Again, unless it's unlikely to be requested. You want the camera at eye level. So I was going to say your child's looking at the camera. They are not looking at the camera unless they are specifically told to do so, perhaps for a commercial or the slate. And I'll talk about the slate in a minute. But you want to be just off of the camera. It's very jarring if they're staring straight down the camera when they do their acting. You want your eye line just off. I tend to use some little sticky tabs, especially if my children are talking to more than one character. I might have a sticky tab one side of the phone and a different coloured sticky tab the other side. When they were younger, I used to use teddy bears. That was a nice tip from my agent, actually, to use teddies or toys so they knew that which one was which character and which one they were talking to. Because again, when you know, that's the first point that I talked about knowing your circumstances. When you know who you're talking to, it's going to change your gesture, your body language, your tone of voice, etc. So eye line, not at the camera, but just off to one side, or perhaps a couple of different eye lines. If the character's taller than you, perhaps you're looking up to that character. But I wouldn't advise looking up, and certainly not looking down for an entire tape. If we can't see your eyes, we just can't connect with you. So make sure we've got that eye line going well. And feel free to have a look back at your tape. I like to, with my children, some like it more than others, to watch back together if you can. And once they get over, I think they're better than the adults actually at getting over seeing and hearing themselves. Once they get over the cringe, if you like, of that, if they feel cringy, they can soon spot things with your tuition. Oh, my eye line's off there. I caught the camera. I had some teenagers doing this in the week, and they could spot it straight away. They got very good at it. And ultimately, you're training them to be able to create their own self-tapes in the future. So if they can spot it, brilliant. But I wouldn't advise over watching, as I said at the beginning, because then they can become very conscious of what faces they are and aren't pulling, and it won't be as natural. It won't be sort of coming from within anymore. So when you're looking at the technical aspects, I think it's good to watch it back and to learn those few things. Okay, so that's the technical bits. Now on to something very untechnical, in my opinion, and that's nerves. I've found a lot of students respond really well to self-tapes and are actually less nervous than in-person auditions, which is wonderful. And I think a lot of that is down to the fact that you've got another take. However, you don't want to be going on and on and on and exhausting them with take after take after take. My advice would be sort of 3 takes maximum. Sometimes I like to do a safety one, I call it, at the end. I say to my students, yeah, you've absolutely nailed that. Brilliant, fantastic. Let's just do one for safety or one for fun. Or I might say, well, yeah, that's your safety take. That's fine. But shall we switch it up a bit, change the energy, whatever, or just do one for your own fun? And sometimes that can be the best take that comes out. But nerves can affect the tape, especially if this is something that means a lot to them and they really want to get it right. Of course, there's no real right or wrong in terms of choices, because it comes down to a million things, including energy and looks, etc., and the other pieces of the casting puzzle. So you never want anyone to feel that they've got it right or wrong. They've done a great job, they've submitted the audition, forget about it. Anyway, I digress. We're going to talk about nerves. The nervous thing I see by far the most, and I talk about this in my book, Confidence Within, actually, which is for adults or children, it's swaying. I've even seen famous people and royalty doing this on TV. I think, why has nobody told them not to do this? They need to plant their feet, so parallel, foot flat on the ground, and drag that energy a little bit into the torso and stop the swaying. Because if you are in this mid shot, or goodness forbid in a close-up and you're swaying, your head is going to be all over the place, and that is not going to work for an audience or a director. So don't sway. Unless, of course, this character is swaying for some particular reason and it's part of your creative choice, that's different. But in general, don't sway. Keep that body grounded and stay in your frame. You've already framed it well using your phone, and you don't want to be swaying in and out of that. By all means, if your character moves and goes from one place to another, choreograph that, make that part of your tape, but don't sway. So the other thing is rushing. That can show up in nerves because the child just wants to get it done so they get their lines out as quickly as they possibly can. And again, it doesn't suit the scene, so you don't want to rush. But as I mentioned in the beginning, you also don't want to be too slow because you're thinking of lines. And the other thing is, sometimes on camera, a student can be quite stiff because they're tense, because they're nervous. So I suggest just a little shakeout warm-up with a couple of deep diaphragmatic breaths. That usually shakes off the stiffness quite easily. And again, a couple takes in and that might go. But if it's still looking very stiff, just come to whatever favourite warm-up you have. I like sort of dropping through the spine and restacking the spine. Or it might be some breathing, or maybe you just want to get them to run round outside for 5 minutes. You know your child, you know your actor. Give them something that will shake out that stiffness in the body. So I've mentioned lines, and I talked about if we don't know the lines well enough, it can be really tricky, especially if you've got a tight turnaround, fitting all of this in with school and hobbies and everything else, and trying to do it in the daylight hours if you've not got your lights. It can be tricky. I generally find children learn lines better than the adults, and you can give them a script, away they go, here you go, learn this in the car or whatever. And my children seem to nail that no problem at all. But if they do need some encouragement learning lines, I would say things that work well are saying the lines out loud, getting tested on the lines. It doesn't matter if they go wrong. In actual fact, I'm pretty sure there is proof that if you get something wrong and then relearn it, you actually know it more solidly than you did before. So reading out loud, being tested on those lines, listening for some people works, recording them and listening to them back works. I quite like recording my cue lines. So again, if this is a piece of more than one person talking, record the other lines with a nice big gap. I always underestimate the gap. A nice big gap for your own lines. And then you can practice out loud on your own, because I appreciate, or they can practice out loud on their own. I appreciate there's not always time to be sitting with your child actor and running lines. Perhaps they could be, again, car journeys. We seem to have a lot of car journeys. Listening to them on a car journey, perhaps. And what else? To take the pressure out of lines. Oh, some people like to write them out. I quite like mnemonics, where you take the first letter of each line and then look at that as almost like a pattern, like a map of lines. That's worked really well for me. And if it's a huge piece, then chunking, breaking the lines down into much smaller chunks. And you can use that alongside the idea of what the character's thinking and feeling and where they have changes of thought. That goes really well alongside chunking the lines. So I've started to talk about what does make a good self-tape, and I feel I have said a lot of these are the things that go wrong. So in general, if I haven't already covered how you make things right, what you want to do is keep things as simple as possible, is stay connected to the character, making sure your child understands the character and the situation. Sometimes it can be quite a dark and difficult situation. Luckily, my youngest seems totally up for these and very empathetic towards the characters that she's playing, even though the circumstances can be completely different to her own life. She will often pick somebody she knows or a character she already knows existing from TV and try to tap into them. Often it's a few people. I'm taking that from them and this from somebody else and pop them together to try and understand the character a little bit. And it's about, of course, being present. If they are truly acting this as if they are saying it and doing it for the first time, in reality, in their imaginary world, then they will be present. But if they're just thinking, force the emotion, be angry or whatever, then it won't feel present. So we want to be simple, connected. We want to understand and we want to be present. Because ultimately, we're looking for something in these tapes that feels real, that doesn't feel like acting. So these tapes don't need to be perfect. You don't want to be, again, I talked about lines and knowing the lines. If a line goes wrong, don't worry about it. Carry on. Submit the tape, especially if you haven't got time to do it again. Sometimes students can go again and again and again trying to get the lines perfect, and actually a tape where the lines weren't perfect, but the intentions were great and totally in line with the character. Sometimes that's the stronger tape to submit. I think casting would far rather see something exciting and real than perfect. After all, life isn't perfect, right? So it doesn't need to be perfect. It does need to be clear in terms of their intentions, in terms of their dialogue. Again, the microphone will help with that. A warm-up will help with that. And it does need to be connected and truthful. That's really, I think if we just bring it to those, clear, connected and truthful. If the tape is those things, I think you're on to an absolute winner. So as I said, I talk about these things all the time to my own children, my students, and sometimes to myself as well. It can be hard taking your own advice, can't it? So I hope these self-tape tips have been useful to you or to your young performer that you are guiding along the way. And I would love to hear if some of these things are working for you, or if you have new tips that you would be able to share with people listening to this podcast, because I'm a true believer in everybody helping each other in this industry. So it'd be great to hear about what works and what doesn't. Drop me an email, lisa@thedramacoach.co.uk, and I would love to hear all about it. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. If this episode resonated, do share it with someone who might need it. And don't forget to follow for more. You can find me on TikTok, Instagram, and other socials at The Drama Coach, and on YouTube for longer videos and training. See you in the next episode.